Hi, we're doing life sciences revision on nervous system, and you're going to continue. I know you're going to enjoy the lesson throughout until we get to the end. Have you ever thought about why you are able to hear sounds, you are able to taste, you are able to recognize people or recognize objects? If you are not able to tell how does it work, I'm going to show you how it works. The keywords that we're going to deal with here, it's central nervous system, which is formed by the brain and the spinal cord. Remember, I say it is formed by the brain and the spinal cord. Together, they form what we call central nervous system. And then we've got the word that we're going to use again, cerebrospinal fluid. We're referring to that fluid that are found around the spinal cord that we're talking to. And it also protects the spinal cord and the brain, which means the cerebrospinal fluid, it's a protective fluid. It's a protective layer around the brain and the spinal cord. Then we have another new word here, meninges. Again, this is now a membrane. The first one is a fluid. Then we are talking to a membrane. That also does what? It does protect the brain and the spinal cord. It is found around the brain and the spinal cord. Then we continue with the words again that we're going to come across while we continue with our lesson. Now we're looking at the gray matter. This is the part of the brain. We are still in the central nervous system. The part of the brain and the spinal cord that consists of the cell bodies. This is another new word that you'll come across, and the dendrites. We are still going to talk to dendrites and cell bodies when we talk to neurons. So don't worry about them. We'll talk to these. Then we have the white matter. That is again part of the brain and the spinal cord. It consists of the myelin sheath. Still, we're going to see this word when we deal with the neurons. And the axon, again, we will come across this word when we deal with the neurons. So if you look at this, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms that we're going to deal with when we deal with the nerves. Now, we said we're dealing with the central nervous system. If we're dealing with central nervous system, we said central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So let's look at this brain. Its part and the function of each and every part of this brain. We start here. Here we've got the cerebellum. This is what we're talking about, the biggest part of the brain. What is the function of this biggest part of the brain up to here? It controls voluntary, meaning those actions that you decide to do. This is where now you take a decision. This is controlled by the cerebrum. Again, this cerebrum receives and interprets sensations. What are we talking about when we're talking about sensations? What you feel from the sense organs. Again, it's where the high thought is processed. So, if you look at the cerebrum, it's the biggest part of the brain, but the name is shorter. I'm telling you this now because I know you always confuse cerebellum and cerebrum. So, cerebrum, the biggest part, cerebellum, the smallest one. We get in there. Let's continue with the part of the brain. Then from there, we move to the second one, the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum, we're looking at this part of our brain. Then what does it do? It connects the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. It's a connecting part of the right and the left hemisphere. Then when it connects the two hemispheres, it's there to allow what? Communication between the two hemispheres. For you to remember the corpus callosum, if you put your fist together like this, you take this as the left-hand hemisphere of the brain, the right-hand hemisphere of the brain. Then when we do the section, the transverse section of the brain, this would be your corpus callosum. You'll remember this when you do your fist. We continue now with the parts of the brain and the functions. We move to number 3 here. Then we talk into the cerebellum. I said we've got cerebrum, the bigger part. Now we move into cerebellum, the smallest part of the brain that looks like a leaf. You will remember that. Please make sure you understand the cerebellum as the smallest one, shaped like a leaf, and cerebrum, the biggest part of the brain, where your high thoughts are. Then we continue. Then we are here where I said you should remember that it looks almost like a leaf. That is the shorter name, the longer name for the smaller part of the brain. What does it do? It coordinates all voluntary. Remember, we said the cerebrum, the biggest part, does what? Controls. The smallest part, which is having a longer name, coordinates voluntary movements, and it controls muscle tension and maintain balance. For me to be able to be balanced, even if when I run and I change direction and I change speed, the cerebrum will be there, cerebellum will be there to maintain my balance. That's the function of the smaller part, that is leaf-like structure with the longer name. Then we continue with the parts of the brain again. Number 4, that is medulla oblongata. This is the part that we're talking to, which transmits the nerve impulse between the spinal cord and the brain. And it also controls involuntary actions. We did talk to voluntary actions. Now we're talking to involuntary actions, like your heartbeat, your breathing. You don't control that. It is controlled by your medulla oblongata. Number 5, that's your hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is here in the brain, and it is the control center of hunger, thirst, sleep, body temperature, and emotions. Whatever you feel, when you feel hungry, you should know that is the hypothalamus that is in action. Then we move to the spinal cord. As we said, that central nervous system consists of the spinal cord and the brain. Now we're looking at the spinal cord. Here's the structure of the spinal cord. We've got the gray matter here, and the gray matter here, and the gray matter here. And we've got the dorsal root. This is the root that comes from the top. The D, remember the D comes before the V. So the top part of this part of the spinal cord is the dorsal, remember, with this D. And then we've got the ventral root. V comes after D. Then we've got the spinal nerve that moves in here. Then we talk into that. The center here, we're looking at the central canal. And this part that looks like H is what we call the gray matter. That is the structure of the spinal cord. Let's continue now. Keywords of the part that we dealt with, we've got the spinal cord. This spinal cord connects the brain and the rest of the nervous system. We move to the receptors now. The receptors receives the stimuli, and they are located in the sense organs. So the nerves convert the stimulus into an impulse. The effectors here, we're talking to muscles or glands that responds to the impulse from the central nervous system. Then the dorsal part of the dorsal part of the spinal cord, I said it is at the top. Remember, I said the D comes first before the V. So the dorsal root is the back part of the top part of an animal spinal cord. Ventral part is the front part of the abdominal or the lower side. The afferent conducts inward impulses, and the efferent conducts the outward impulses. Then functions of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a pathway for all the impulses, and it conducts them from the receptors to the brain, and from the brain to the effectors as muscles or glands. Then the spinal cord again processes all the reflex actions. This, we are coming to it. Then we've got the parasympathetic and parasympathetic nerve impulses and conducted along the spinal cord and to all the organs. Guys, we did look at the structure and function of the brain and the spinal cord and everything. For now, let's go grab a glass of water, then we move to the ad break and continue with our interesting lesson.